Mayong adlaw mga amigo, my name is MJ and today we are going to talk about all of the books that I have read in February. So for this month, I have read a total of 14 books, which is for me a very huge undertaking because I have undergone a massive reading slump since last year. So reading 14 books for the month of February is a very amazing feat. So without further ado, let's start this video. So the very first book that I have read for the month of February is Half a Soul by Olivia. It is a fantasy romance set in the Regency time period, and it is about a girl whose soul was divided into half by a fairy, and the fairy took half of the soul, making the girl not feel any sort of emotion. And then the girl met this sorcerer and they developed a type relationship of some sorts where the sorcerer helped this girl heal from the fairy, like what the fairy did to her. And to be honest, although the premise is rather interesting, I really did not like it as much. I think it lacked depth, it lacked emotion, and I would have loved it if it was longer and the story would have been much deeper. That's why I rated this book 3 stars. The second book which I have read is Choosing THEO by Victoria Aveline, and it is also a fantasy romance / alien romance book, and it is about a girl named Jade who was abducted from Earth, and then she was then sent to this planet where women have like a lesser amount in the population while men has a higher amount in population. With that said, in this planet, the women were cherished and they were actually given the option to choose their husbands every 3 months. And then the male in this planet were sent to husbandry schools in which they learned how to be a good husband, how to take care of their kids, etc. And I think by that premise alone, it is quite interesting. And of course, these species are very similar to humans, but they have a little tweak in the reproductive system that makes them different. But overall, they are quite similar to human beings. And actually, I really enjoyed reading this book. I think it is really interesting. However, when I first started it, I thought it was really weird because I think it is also the very first time in which I have read an alien romance book. Like, even though I'm a Star Wars fan, I don't really like read Star Wars for the romance, so for me this is the very first time in which I have read an alien romance book. I think it's great, but also it lacked depth and emotion, but overall I still enjoyed it. That's why I rated this book 3 stars. The third book which I have read is Moon Touch by Elizabeth Briggs, and it is a shapeshifter werewolf romance book, and it is about a girl who came from the Cancer Pack. However, before I'm going to delve into the romance aspect of the book, I'm going to talk as to how this world was developed of some sorts. So in this world, there are 2 types of witches, the sun witches and the moon witches. And then the sun witches actually have this several packs, and their names is connected to the zodiac. So there are packs that is named Cancer Pack, and there is this pack named Pisces, basically all of the star signs. And then when it comes to the moon witches, they basically hold the evil packs based on their lore. So this girl actually came from Cancer Pack, and she was degraded there because she's not a full-blooded werewolf. She's half human and half wolf because her father committed adultery from his mate and mated with her mother, thus she was born. And then every time like a wolf or a person of this pack reached their 22 years of age, they were then sent to a convergence in which the sun witches will make some sort of magic to get out the wolf from their system. Basically, they can shift, and then after giving them the power to shift, they were then like mated to their true mate, so basically like soulmate type of thing. And during the convergence, this girl met like the alpha of the pack that was supposed to be bad, meeting the pack under the moon witches, and they developed a type of connection. However, during the convergence, this girl was mated to another wolf, so that's the drama. And during the convergence as well, someone betrayed their pack, basically their allied pack run away from them, and this pack, which is the Leo pack, which is the enemy of the Cancer Pack, killed all of her family. And since this chaos was happening, this girl tried to run away, and then she was absorbed by the pack, like the evil pack under the moon witches. And then she discovered a lot of things, and of course, since this is a romance book, she developed a romantic relationship with the alpha of the pack. And I think this is such an interesting premise. This is such an interesting take on the shapeshifter werewolf romance. So if you like as to what I have been saying in the past minutes so far, I recommend you guys to pick this book up. The next book that I have read is actually the sequel of the previous book which I have talked about, and the name of the book is Star Curse. And to be honest, I really did not like this book at all. And the reason is this. I have told earlier that this girl was mated to another wolf of another pack, right? And in this book, it was discovered that the mate supposedly was her brother. And the Sun Witches has manipulated the whole thing. And for me, that is quite uncomfy because in the first part of the book, there is sexual tension and they have kissed like twice already. And for me, that is quite a horrible take, and I wish that the author did not went down that path because that is quite uncomfy for me, and that's the main reason why I rated the second book 2 stars and was not able to finish it all because I cannot with that plot twist. I only read about 70% because my god, that plot twist is horrible and this series would have been great without that. So the subsequent books which I'm going to talk about is based on this omegaverse world. So if you guys don't know what is omegaverse is basically this alternate universe in which the world has different biologies for humans. So there are humans that were called alphas, and there are humans that are called betas, and there are humans that are called omegas. So alphas were the dominant like human beings in this world, and they usually hold positions of power, stuff like that, and they are basically hot-headed like people, and they are very strong, and people fear them most of the time. And then betas are actually normal human beings. They don't have the same urges such as alphas, and they are basically like us, really. And then the omegas, which is considered as the lower faction and the rarest faction of this world, is actually like the cherished one in this world because omegas are very rare, and they actually have this capability to bear more children than betas, and they go into heats like cats and dogs. I know, that's very weird. So the very first book that I have read under Omegaverse is In Deep by Hannah Hayes, and it is about a girl. She's in college and she's an Omega, and then she is trying so hard to fight against a stereotype against Omega by studying science. And there she met like this rowing team, and I must say that this rowing team is full of alphas. And upon meeting this girl, they develop some sort of connection, blah blah blah, romantic interest, and a lot of, yeah, that's basically what happened in this book. It's quite steamy, and I really enjoyed reading this. And actually, this is the very first time that I have read a reverse harem book, and I think it's quite interesting to read this book. However, I would have loved it if this book has more depth, more emotion as well. Although I really enjoyed it, I would have loved it if it has explored that area more. But again, this book is an enjoyable read, and I rate this book 3 stars. The next book which I have read is also from Omegaverse, and it is Not Many Options by Jillian West, and it is about a girl whose alpha broke up with her and left her with 2 kids, and then she was forced to isolate herself in this island, and there she met a pack of alphas, blah blah blah. They have a connection together because she smells good and all of that stuff. However, what I like about this book is that it is like an adult type of Omegaverse, unlike the first one, and I really like how this has more emotion and depth, because I feel sympathy and remorse for the main character because she's still very young. She's 21 and she already has 2 kids. She was groomed, and that is quite an interesting take because it's very deep and very hard to read. However, I would have loved if this was longer because again, Omegaverse books have this tendency to like give a great plot and then afterwards focus on like the dynamics between an alpha and omega, and I would have loved it if they have explored more in the emotional side of things. So I rated this book 3 stars. So the next book which I'm going to talk about is also under Omegaverse. However, this is my only 5-star book of the month, and I really enjoyed reading this because this is a slow burn Omegaverse book, and I'm going to tell you about the world of this Omegaverse. Books under this universe have different takes on Omegaverse. So in this book, Omegas were sent to an academy in which they learn how to be a good Omega, and then Alphas basically go to these functions in which the Omegas will present themselves by dancing and all of that stuff. So our main character does not like being an Omega, and she has been in this institution for a couple of years now. So basically she's in debt with this institution. She's like 20 plus years of age now, and she does not want to have an Alpha in her life. So all this time she's hiding being an Omega by exhausting herself and all this stuff so that her perfume will not go out and her scent will not go out and no Alpha will like her. So basically that's the premise of the whole story. She's running from her own biology, and I really enjoyed that because she's not submissive at all. She has her own mind. And then this group of Alphas, they have an Omega too. However, this Omega is a man, so they face criticism from other people because of course the pack will not have any kids. So since this girl has a lot of debt to the school, and the school was owned by one of the fathers of this Alpha pack, the father decided to put this Omega to this pack and make them as their own. And there's drama, of course, because this pack already has an Omega. And yeah, I find it really interesting because the whole time in this book, the girl does not like the pack at all, and although she feels the urges such as any Omega does, she does not like go and fulfill her urges. And I think what made this book interesting is that it made me cry because I felt her pain, felt her need to like be herself and not bow down as to what biology is telling her. And I think that is really interesting, and thus this book is my 5-star book of the year, of the month. Actually, also my first 5-star book of the year. So the second book which I have read is actually the second book of Pack Darling, and I did not enjoy this book as much as the first book because I think there is just something about me. If the book is slow burn and then the next book they are already in a relationship, for me it kills the whole vibe, and I think that's what happened in this book. Although it is still a very enjoyable read, I did not like this as much because I just missed the spunky attitude that the character had in the first book. So I still rated this book 3 stars though, and if you like a slow burn Omega verse book, you can read this one and the first book. The next book which I have read is also under omegaverse, and it is The Bounty by Liliana Carlisle. And this book has an interesting premise actually because this is a dystopian omegaverse, and then since omegas were placed in this like institution in which they are basically made as prostitutes, this omega, which is the main character, hid herself away from society. She is actually a computer scientist before shit went down. So the whole city, the whole country, city or country, the whole country was looking for her with a huge bounty on her head because she's the only Omega that is not in this institution. And while she was hiding, an Alpha was actually like riding around premises where she was hiding, and then the Alpha smelled her, of course, because she was bleeding because she had stepped on a glass or something. And since the Alpha smelled her, she was sent home to the home of the Alpha by the Alpha himself, and then there she met the pack, etc, etc. A relationship grew from there. She then went to the institution to her own accord, etc, etc. And yes, so I would have loved to expound as to what happened, but everything actually went shit in the middle part of the book. The premise itself is very interesting, but then I don't know what happened really. Like everything was so rushed. Like even the fact that she went to the institution herself was not really that elaborated, and that is such a sad thing because I think this book would have been greater if that was elaborated much more. And yes, that's why I rate this book 3 stars. Although an enjoyable read, the premise would have developed better. The next book which I'm going to talk about is one of the most famous books under Omegaverse, and it is Lola and the Millionaires by Kathryn. This is the second book under the Smutify series, and I should have read like the first book, which is Baby and the Night Howlers, but I find the book, I tried reading it, like I tried reading like 20% of Baby and the Night Howlers, but I felt like it's not for me. So I tried reading like Lola and the Millionaires because I think it's interesting because this is the very first Omegaverse book that I have read through a beta's perspective, and I think that's what makes this book rather interesting for me. So Lola was a beta, as what I have mentioned, and all of her life she wanted to be an omega. So when Baby, her best friend, became an omega, she was very desperate and used the smell of Baby to get the alphas that she want. However, she was distraught by an alpha eventually and got her heart broken because she was abused and all that stuff, and I don't want to expound on that because reading that makes me sick. And then eventually she met a group of alphas with an omega which loved her very very much eventually, blah 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 and all that stuff. And although I find the premise a bit interesting, again, like many omegaverse books, they mainly focus on the dynamics rather than the emotional side of things. Like omegaverse books tends to be more physical, if you know what I mean. And I find it quite sad, really, because this premise, again, is very interesting and it could have been expounded much better. So the next book that I've read is I Think Not by KNOT SINCLAIR, and again, this is an omegaverse book, and it is actually a very very interesting premise from the start. The very first part of the book, there is this omega who mainly posts like videos to this app which is quite similar to TikTok, talking as to how to survive as a lone omega. And then there are this group of alphas, I forgot their name, and they also post videos on TikTok or this app. Like, it's very similar to TikTok, so I just think of it as TikTok. So this group of alphas post videos on the app as to how they take care of an omega, blah blah blah, because they're finding an omega for themselves. And eventually, like, they got heated on the internet, so they fought on the internet, like they hate each other. But then they decided to meet in this convention, and then they realized, this pack of alphas realized that this omega is their mate or some sort. So eventually, this omega went into heat, and then you know what happens in omegaverse books, physical action has happened, and then yes, that's basically it. Like, there is tension in the first part of the book, but it went away. Also, I forgot that this omega, since she is very famous online, she has a stalker, and this stalker followed her and almost got her killed. So yeah, and I really enjoyed reading that. However, again, more physical than emotional. I would have loved it if it is much more emotional, if it is quite similar to Pack Darlings, in which there are a lot of emotions going around. So yeah, but the premise itself is very interesting and I really enjoyed reading that, so I rate this book 3 stars. The next book which I have read is also an omegaverse book, and it is, the title is In Doubt by Hannah Hayes. It is actually the 4th book supposedly, after In Deep, which I have said earlier, and it is about an omega who is studying sciences, and she has this academic rivalry with this alpha, and they basically got into heated discussions during their class. They are studying archaeology, and then they were sent to Egypt and all of that stuff, and this guy brought his pack with him because he's rich, and why not, you know? like coincidence? I think not. So in there, they basically fought again as to the artifacts, blah blah blah, and then this girl went into heat, and it turns out that this alpha was the one who's going to take care of her and his pack, and yeah, physical action, all this stuff. However, what I liked about this book is that in the first part, they focused so much with their archaeology work, which makes the book more interesting. They are in Egypt, and they talked about like the gods in Egypt, and they connected it as to how the omegaverse works in this world, and I think that is quite an interesting take when it comes to omegaverse. However, more physical, less emotion, but I still enjoyed reading this book. That's why I rate this book 3 stars. The second to the last book which I have read is Captive of Wolves by Eva Chase, and it is actually like a mixture of shifter wolf and fae, and I think that is really interesting. Like, you guys know, if you have been in my channel for quite a long time, that I really did not like fae. But with this book, I really enjoyed reading the fae in this book, because the fae in this book are much gentler compared to what I am used to reading, and I think that is quite an enjoyable take. And again, this is about a girl, a human girl, who was abducted by a group of werewolf fae, and then she was placed in this cage, and then they get her blood like every month. The fae's name was Eric, and then they drink the blood so that the shifting, like the werewolf shifting every month, is not that painful. And then when she was in the cage, like a group of alpha fays like stormed the castle and they got her, and upon realizing that she is the tonic, which is the drink that the dudes are drinking to stop their shifting to be painful, they abducted her again. She was basically double abducted by two different groups, and then they took care of her unlike the very first group, and then they basically like revived her faith in the werewolf fae and all that stuff. And I really enjoyed reading this one because this is quite a romantic book. I really enjoyed reading it. I love August. Like, August is my type when it comes to this fae, and it opened my eyes to a different world, and I think I'm going to read more fae soon. Actually, I'm currently reading The Cruel Prince, and since my eyes are already opened, The Cruel Prince has changed for me. So I'm going to talk about that change in my future videos, I hope. And although I really enjoyed it, there are times that the book is quite dragging, a bit boring to be honest. But overall, I really enjoyed reading this, and I don't know if I'm going to read like the next books of the series because there are 12 books. But for me, this is such a nicely written book, and yes, I really enjoyed it. The last book which I have read for this month is Kingdom of the Wicked. And let me tell you, I did not like Kingdom of the Wicked. I did not finish it. I'm only like 70% in. And although I have read like raving reviews for this one, I don't think I'm going to read it again anytime soon. Like, although the premise is very interesting, I think the descriptions is a little bit lazy and a little bit off. Descriptions are more about food, not the world, and I find myself rolling my eyes every time like the character describes the food that she is making and all of that stuff, because I would love to see like more descriptions about the world, not the food. So that's why I rated this book 2 stars, because I was not able to finish it. However, please give me motivations down below if you like this book, because I really wanted to give this a chance because the cover is actually very beautiful. Yeah, so that's it for this video. Thank you so much for watching, and I do hope that you finished watching this video, and if you have any comments, please put it down below and let's discuss, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye guys.
Oh, 1 mile in fog patches and showers early Friday, but improving to greater than 6 miles on Friday morning.
Stars shining bright.